The man I loved at 21 came back into my life when I was 68 years old. He was standing in the produce section of a supermarket, holding a bag of oranges and looking exactly like someone I had spent 47 years trying not to remember. Older, of course. His hair had turned white. His shoulders were bent slightly forward. His hands, once smooth and restless, had become the hands of an old man. But when he looked at me and said, "Eleanor?" I was 21 again. That is the dangerous thing about certain people. Time can bury them, distance can silence them, and entire lives can grow over the place where you once loved them. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, they say your name. And suddenly, you discover that some doors were never locked. If you stay with me, I will tell you what happened when the man I had loved before my marriage returned after nearly 5 decades, and why I learned, much too late, that regret is not always about the life you didn't choose. Sometimes it is about the truth you refused to tell yourself while you were living the one you did. I know this because I married another man, raised 3 children, celebrated 42 anniversaries, buried my husband, and spent most of my adult life telling myself that the boy named Samuel was nothing more than an old memory. Then, at 68, I saw him beside a display of oranges. And I realized I had been lying to myself for almost half a century. Samuel and I met in the summer of 1968. I was 21. He was 23. We worked at the same hotel near the coast. I cleaned rooms on the 3rd floor, and Samuel carried luggage, repaired broken doors, and somehow always found a reason to pass through the corridor where I was working. The first thing he ever said to me was, "You're terrible at singing." I had been singing while changing bed sheets. I looked at him and said, "Then stop listening." He laughed. I fell in love with him 3 months later. Not all at once. That is another lie people tell about love. For me, it happened in small pieces. A sandwich left for me when I forgot my lunch. A walk home after work. His hand reaching for mine on a cold evening in November. By the following spring, we had made plans. Samuel wanted to move west. He talked about a small house with a porch and a garden. I wanted children. He wanted a dog. Neither of us had much money. But at 21, poverty feels temporary when you are standing beside someone who makes the future look possible. Then my father became ill. That changed everything. My mother needed help. My younger brother was still in school. And suddenly, moving across the country with Samuel felt selfish. At least, that is what everyone told me. My father sat at the kitchen table one evening in February 1970. The doctor had given him less than a year to live. "You can't leave your mother," he said. I remember looking at my hands. Samuel was waiting for me. My family was asking me to stay. I was 23 years old and still believed that being a good daughter meant never disappointing anyone. So I made a decision. I told Samuel I couldn't go. He stood outside my parents' house in the rain. It was 9:40 at night. "I can stay," he said. "You shouldn't." "Then tell me you don't love me." I couldn't. He stepped closer. "Eleanor." I remember the rain dripping from his hair. "Tell me." Instead, I said, "This isn't the right time." His face changed. Not with anger. That would have been easier. He simply looked tired. Then he said, "There will always be a reason to wait." I hated him for saying that. Because even then, I knew he was right. 2 weeks later, Samuel left. I did not stop him. That was the first regret of my life. But it wasn't the one that followed me the longest. 3 years later, I married Robert. He was a good man. I need to say that clearly. Robert did not steal me from Samuel. Samuel had already gone. Robert was patient. Reliable. Funny in a quiet way. He worked at the post office and brought me coffee every Saturday morning after we married. When our first son was born, Robert cried so hard that the nurse laughed. We had 3 children. A house. A mortgage. Arguments about bills. Vacations that always cost more than we expected. There were Christmas mornings and broken washing machines and long drives to visit family. It was a real life. And I loved parts of it deeply. But there was one thing I never did. I never told Robert about Samuel. Not really. I mentioned an old boyfriend once. That was all. I thought silence was kindness. I thought the past had no place in a marriage. But silence can become a habit. And once you learn to hide one truth, it becomes easier to hide smaller ones. Not affairs. Not crimes. Feelings. Disappointments. Questions. Over the years, Robert and I became very skilled at being a family. We became less skilled at being honest. At 38, I wanted to return to school. I didn't. Robert worried about the cost. At 46, I wanted to travel. We postponed it. At 53, I told him I felt lonely. He said, "You're never alone. Look at this house." I laughed. Then I stopped bringing it up. From the outside, our marriage looked stable. Inside, there were rooms we no longer entered. Robert died when I was 65. A heart attack. Sudden. He had been trimming the hedge. One moment he was outside. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway listening to a doctor explain that there had been nothing anyone could do. I was married for 42 years. Then, in less than an hour, I became a widow. Grief is strange. You can miss someone and still remember everything you never said to them. For the first year after Robert died, I missed his footsteps most. At 6:15 every evening, I would expect to hear the front door open. Sometimes I even turned my head. Then I remembered. After that, I lived quietly. My children called. My grandchildren visited. I joined a book club I didn't particularly enjoy. I learned how to sleep alone. I thought the story of my life had already been written. Then Samuel appeared between the apples and the oranges. "Samuel?" He smiled. "Well," he said, "at least I know I'm not completely invisible yet." I laughed. And then, without warning, I began to cry. Right there in the supermarket. A woman standing beside a pyramid of oranges was crying because an old man she hadn't seen since 1970 was holding a shopping basket. Samuel placed the oranges down. "Are you all right?" "No," I said. Then I laughed again. "No. I suppose I'm not." We sat in the supermarket cafe for almost 2 hours. He had married. So had I. His wife had died 6 years earlier. He had 1 daughter and 2 grandchildren. He had lived in 3 different states. He had owned a small repair business. And for nearly 5 decades, our lives had moved forward without touching. "Did you ever think about me?" I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. Samuel looked at his coffee. "Yes." "How often?" He smiled. "That's a dangerous question." "I know." Then he looked at me. "Enough." That one word stayed with me all night. Enough. Enough to remember. Enough to wonder. Enough to recognize me after 47 years. Samuel and I began meeting for coffee. At first, once a week. Then twice. My daughter noticed. One Sunday, she asked, "Mom, are you dating?" I was 68 years old. The question made me blush. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "So you're seeing the same man twice a week without dating him?" "It's complicated." She laughed. I didn't. Because it was complicated. I loved talking to Samuel. That was the truth. With him, I remembered parts of myself that had disappeared. Not because Robert had forbidden them. That would have been easier to blame. I had simply become the version of myself everyone needed. A daughter. a wife, a mother, a grandmother. And somewhere between all those roles, I had stopped asking who Eleanor was when nobody needed anything from her. Samuel remembered. He remembered that I hated peppermint tea. That I wanted to see the ocean in winter. That when I was nervous, I twisted the ring on my finger. "You still do that," he said one afternoon. I looked down. I hadn't noticed. My wedding ring had been gone for 3 years. But my fingers still carried the habit. For 8 months, Samuel and I met. We walked. We talked. Once, he drove me to the coast. It was January. Cold and gray. The beach was empty except for 2 children flying a yellow kite. We sat on a bench facing the water. Samuel said, "Do you regret staying?" I knew exactly what he meant. My answer came quickly. Yes. Then I closed my eyes. No. He waited. "I regret some things," I said. "But I don't regret my children. I don't regret Robert. I don't regret the life we built." Samuel nodded. But sometimes I wonder who I would have been if I had been brave." The wind was cold against my face. Samuel looked at the water. Then he said, "I wondered too." For several minutes, we said nothing. Then he reached for my hand. His fingers were old. So were mine. I let him hold it. And for the first time in many years, I felt completely terrified. Because at 68, I had finally understood something. It wasn't Samuel I had been afraid to lose all those years ago. It was the person I might have become if I had chosen myself. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. Samuel invited me to dinner. A real dinner. Not coffee. Not lunch. Dinner. I knew what it meant. Or perhaps I only knew what I wanted it to mean. The restaurant was small and quiet. At 8:05, after the plates had been cleared, Samuel reached across the table. "Eleanor," he said. I looked at him. "I don't want to spend whatever years I have left pretending we're old friends who accidentally found each other." My heart began to beat painfully hard. He continued. "I loved you when I was young. Maybe I never stopped in the way people imagine they do. But I don't want the memory of you anymore." I couldn't breathe. "I want to know who you are now." He took a small breath. "And I want you to know me." There it was. A door. Not the old door. Not the one from 1970. A new one. For several seconds, I stared at his hand on the table. Then I began to cry. Samuel looked frightened. Did I say something wrong? No. I shook my head. No, Samuel. Then what is it? I looked at him. And for the first time in 47 years, I answered honestly. I'm afraid. He squeezed my hand. So am I. That was the moment. Not a kiss. Not a declaration. Just 2 old people sitting across from each other, admitting fear instead of hiding behind good manners. And suddenly, I understood why my life had felt unfinished for so long. It was not because I had chosen Robert instead of Samuel. It was because I had spent decades believing that every decision had to be permanent. That once you chose one road, you were no longer allowed to look at the sky above another. But regret doesn't always mean you chose wrong. Sometimes it means you never allowed yourself to grieve the choice. Samuel and I did not marry. People always seem disappointed when I tell them that. They want a grand ending. A wedding. A white dress. A photograph of 2 elderly people proving that love returned after half a century. Life is not always interested in satisfying endings. Samuel became sick 2 years after we met. Pancreatic cancer. By the time he told me, it had already spread. I sat beside him through appointments. I learned the names of medications. I held his hand when he slept. This time, I did not run from the difficult conversations. One night, when he was 72, Samuel looked at me from his hospital bed. "Do you still regret staying?" I thought for a long time. Then I said, "No." He smiled. "Really?" "I regret not telling you goodbye properly." His eyes filled with tears. "And I regret pretending I didn't remember you." I leaned forward. "Why?" He looked toward the window. "Because I thought if I admitted I still cared, it would mean my whole life had been a mistake." That sentence changed me. Because I had believed the same thing. For years, I thought that if I admitted I had loved Samuel, then I was somehow betraying Robert. But love is not an accounting system. One love does not erase another. A road you didn't take does not make every road you walked worthless. Samuel died 19 days later. I was holding his hand. This time, when a man I loved left, I was there. That mattered. I am 79 now. Sometimes I think about the young woman I was at 21. I want to sit beside her in that rainy doorway. I want to tell her that being a good daughter does not require becoming a stranger to yourself. I want to tell her that staying for someone else is still a choice. And every choice has a cost. But I wouldn't tell her to run away with Samuel. That is the strange part. After everything, I still don't know if that would have been the better life. And perhaps that is the lesson. We waste too many years trying to decide whether our choices were right or wrong. Life is rarely that neat. Robert was not a mistake. My children were not the price I paid for cowardice. Samuel was not the love I should have chosen. They were all parts of one life. My regret was simpler. Whenever I was afraid, I became silent. I let other people decide what I should sacrifice. I called it duty. I called it maturity. Sometimes it was love. But sometimes it was fear. Now, before I make an important decision, I ask myself one question. If nobody were disappointed in me, what would I choose? Not because I always choose it. But because for most of my life, I never even asked. Last month, I went back to the same supermarket. I walked through the produce section. The oranges were stacked exactly where Samuel had been standing. For a moment, I stopped. A young woman pushed a cart past me, talking on her phone. Someone dropped a bottle nearby. The automatic doors opened and closed. Life continued around me. I picked up one orange. Then another. And suddenly I smiled. Not because I had finally found the life I was supposed to live. I no longer believe there is only one. I smiled because, at 68, I finally stopped asking what I should have done. And started paying attention to what was still possible. I still miss Samuel. I still miss Robert. I still miss the young woman who believed she had to become whatever everyone else needed. But I don't mourn her in the same way anymore. She made choices with the courage she had at the time. Now I have different courage. And it is quieter. It doesn't promise that everything will work out. It simply tells the truth. The oranges are still there. But I am not the same woman who walked past them.